What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So of course the much anticipated assassin reworks are out on the PBE, and amongst those we have the LeBlanc rework that's gone live, and she's actually got quite a few changes that are going to change a lot about how she's played and definitely how to play against her. And we've got quite a bit of time to test her out, and definitely here's what we know so far about the reworked LeBlanc. And if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, and let's begin. So since LeBlanc is all kind of shiny and new and stuff, the best place to start is definitely going to be taking a look at her abilities and essentially how they're going to define LeBlanc's play pattern from now on, starting with her passive, which is a completely new ability actually, Sigil of Malice. The old near-death clone is long gone, and in its place is something kind of similar to her old Q. So whenever LeBlanc deals damage to an enemy unit with an ability, she applies a mark, just like her old Q did before the rework, with no limit to how many enemies she can actually apply marks to though. And after a short delay, LeBlanc can damage enemies with another ability to trigger the mark for a ton of bonus damage. And this is actually a really cool change because it means that LeBlanc can't just press QRW and insta-kill people anymore. The delay forces you to have to wait a little bit with your follow-up abilities unless you think you can kill them without the bonus passive damage. So there is a little bit more counterplay that's being introduced, since to do the max damage, LeBlanc now has to be a little bit more patient, give people time to react and stuff, so it's definitely an awesome change. And LeBlanc's Q has been replaced with Shatter Orb, and as an ability, it honestly kind of feels exactly the same as her old Q. It still applies the mark because of her passive, it's just coming from the passive instead of the Q itself this time around. It also has a new effect now though, which makes it a little bit more powerful than the old Q, because if you hit an enemy unit that is marked, the Q will now bounce between all other nearby marked units, kinda similar to Ryze's new wave clear combo with his flexibility, and it gives LeBlanc a really awesome version of wave clear of her own. And of course leaves behind a mark that LeBlanc can blink back to for a quick escape. And since Distortion now applies Sigil of Malice to all enemies hit though, it makes a super awesome combo with her Q in the early levels where the W is not enough by itself to actually clear a minion wave. You can dash in with the W, you land your mark on every single minion and deal the damage, and then you also follow up with a Q that procs the mark and procs every other mark to deal a ton of damage in an area of effect and give you a nice, consistent, and pretty clean wave clear effect. And this works just as well while team fighting as well, so now she's got some area of effect options, as long as you wait long enough for the Sigil of Malice marks to actually activate before lobbing out your Shadow Orb, of course. And another unchanged ability, we have Ethereal Chains on her E. We kind of knew from before the rework that Riot really liked the design of LeBlanc's E, and as a result they left it alone, but one thing that's really cool though is the new interaction between LeBlanc's E and her passive. So the first bit of damage from the chain will mark an enemy with Sigil of Malice, and the delay between the second part of the chain is just long enough to line up perfectly with the delay on the mark, so the E can mark and detonate the mark all by itself for a ton of damage in just a single ability if you land that first hit and keep your target in range. It also has a range indicator on it now too, which is pretty cool. So the real big changes, of course, to LeBlanc are definitely her ultimate Mimic, and most of the complexity in her kit is definitely revolving around how you decide to use it. There's two parts to it. One that's similar to maybe her old ultimate, and one that's kind of similar to her old passive in a way almost. So first up, let's take a look at mimicking your abilities. So essentially, instead of using your ultimate to cast a more powerful version of the last ability you used, you press your ultimate now instead, and then press whatever ability you want to cast with it. So Q, W, E, or R actually, you can double tap the R ability, and if you use a basic ability, you'll go invisible for a moment, and then spawn a clone before both of you, so you and your clone, cast that ability together, which essentially makes the clone using a much more powerful version in a similar way kind of to how our old ultimate worked. You essentially get to double up on the actual power of the abilities, which means that you can still do all your stuff like use your distortion twice, but you'll just have to hit your R and then your W again for the second cast, so you've got an extra button press this time. If you want a distortion twice, you have to W, press your R, and then press your W again, rather than just WR like the old LeBlanc. And you might be wondering what happens if you cast your ultimate twice, and this is definitely a brand new trick for LeBlanc to pull off that could honestly be insanely cool and really can put you out on top in some situations when you use it properly. So when you activate Mimic and then use your R again, it's going to let you spawn a clone at a target location anywhere on the map. and the clone will then walk towards the closest enemy champion and use your last used ability on them as kind of like a fake out. It's not going to actually deal damage, but it kind of like fakes them out and pretends with the ability animation. So if you used a distortion last, you could spawn a clone of yourself using an ultimate in a completely different lane, by the way, it is global, and it would walk towards the enemy champion and use a distortion on them, and you might be able to like fake out some flashes or maybe potentially get a nice initiation for your teammates doing some pretty tricky stuff with that. Now, although the clone doesn't deal any damage, because of course that would definitely be super broken, it seriously mind games the heck out of people since, out of nowhere they're going to think that a LeBlanc is ganking them. So you can definitely use it to confuse people like crazy so your team can lock them down, or you can honestly maybe use it to like distract people while you make a slippery escape on the backside, or there's all kinds of stuff that you can do with her new ultimate. It's awesome. So overall, her kit is looking pretty cool and matches up really well with what we expected for Riot's aim for her rework. Giving her a delay to make her burst a bit slower, putting more of a focus on just being deceptive and trickery and stuff like that. And so overall, she has honestly much more dynamic gameplay thanks to not really being limited to using her ultimate on the previous ability cast. You can kind of just recast the ultimate and use it at will. So that's a nice new decision that you get the option to make. And she's also got earlier access to wave clear as well thanks to the new WQ combo, so in tough lanes where she can't get kills or where she also maybe wants to play aggressive and bully champions out that struggle the last hit, she also has the option to wave clear minions super fast rather than just going for kills all the time. Her burst is definitely still amazing, and she also still has the ability to juke people like crazy. Honestly, the mind games now are even more crazy thanks to that new mimic combo that gives her a clone literally anywhere on the map that she wants. It's honestly just a hilarious ability. She's definitely going to require a lot more strategic planning and foresight, so the old kind of walk up and QRW strategy isn't going to be enough to actually exploit her power anymore, so I would say that she's become a little bit more difficult to play, but she also just has more versatile options in general, so it's definitely a worthy trade-off. The extra input required to use her ultimate can definitely slow you down, especially if you play on high ping as well, so she might be a lot easier to deal with once you actually lock her down, but it's also worth keeping in mind that she also lost her old near-death clone passive, so you're also less likely to lose out on a LeBlanc kill in the future when you're chasing her down, which is probably good news for a lot of people, to be honest. So most of LeBlanc's old ability combos still work in a similar way. You can still use your double distortion, you get that AoE damage, proc the marks and stuff. It's definitely a lot slower of a burst combo in general. There's a lot of trade-offs of new weaknesses that are being introduced to LeBlanc, but also new strengths as well, and they complement each other quite nicely, and overall makes for a nice, well-rounded assassin. Now, LeBlanc is definitely going to play similarly in lane. She's definitely kind of weak, honestly, versus real heavy poke mages in the early levels who can super bully her out, stay outside of her Q and W range, but she's also really going to shine against melee champions since she can just harass the heck out of them, burst, honestly even just auto attack them if they're trying to sit and CS in lane. And LeBlanc on live can't actually wave clear that well before level 6, but the new WQ combo helps her a lot and lets her punish melee champions so much harder, and also covers up a nice weakness that she had before the rework. And combined with her E and its synergy with the updated passive, LeBlanc is honestly just gonna destroy melee matchups. And you can definitely still expect LeBlanc to occasionally pick up those fast level 3 First Bloods with Ignite if the opponents are getting a little bit careless. She'll be just as safe in lane as always though, thanks to Distortion of course, but it is on quite a long cooldown, so again, you can definitely punish it if you force it out. Force her flash as well. Essentially, she has much more defined weaknesses now, so hopefully she won't be too crazy overpowered, but she did seem to be quite strong in the version that we played her in. Where roaming is going to be just as scary. Of course, once she hits level 6, she can do some really crazy stuff, some really tricky situations with her double ultimate combo, and just honestly really surprise out opponents. And it's definitely easy to force a flash or just get your opponents to waste cooldowns on stuff just because you happen to show up in lane with your clone that's not actually you. And her team fighting is of course pretty similar to the old LeBlanc as well. She's honestly probably better in team fights now because of the way her passive can be applied to groups of enemies, so she can actually do AoE damage in team fights now, and she has a lot more versatile combos and options, and that's something that really shines through when it comes to team fights that you don't always necessarily see in the laning phase. I mean, she is an assassin after all though, so just searching out that one squishy target to deal with is never going to be a bad plan, and it still works quite effectively. It's just a little bit more fair to play against now, requires a little bit more setup. You can't just jump into the enemy team 1v5, you're going to have to find someone out that's out of position or something like that. Overall though, the rework's definitely looking pretty successful so far. I mean, it does seem to be pretty strong. Her burst is still really high, but it is a bit delayed, so it has a tiny bit more counterplay in theory. It definitely does make her less unhealthy in general as far as the mechanics go, and the new deceptive theme is really cool, and it does a ton of favors for her as a champion because it definitely makes her playstyle a lot more distinct. You know, not so much like Shaco, not so much like Zed. She's got her like own little niche now, and on top of all that, her weaknesses are a lot better defined, so hopefully she'll be a lot easier to balance at the competitive level, and she isn't going to be escaping anymore just because of her passive triggering and people not guessing which one is the correct LeBlanc clone. Overall though, she's definitely looking stronger than she was before, I would say, in terms of her overall power level, so she's definitely looking like she's going to be a pretty solid pickup, but she is also a little bit more difficult to play perfectly and a little bit easier to counter, so it's honestly probably a fair trade-off, at least for the solo queue level. As far as competitive play goes, she might be pretty broken, I have to say, but in general, she's definitely looking really strong. Anyway, that's just about going to wrap up our thoughts on the new rework LeBlanc, how it's looking so far, you know, how OP the new LeBlanc actually is. Definitely let us know with your comments, your thoughts on the LeBlanc rework below, and what you think Rai might change about her rework before we actually see her hit the live servers. And we'll be taking a look at Talon and Rengar in future videos as well, so definitely stay tuned for those. Looks like that's gonna be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.